if somebody made this a movie script, it would probably be thrown out because it's such a crazy thing to happen.
That's rough.
Around 4 a.m., calls started coming into 911. I decided to put them in my backpack and walked 1,400 miles from Gilbert, Arizona to Kalispell, Montana, and tell the story along the way, because I guarantee you don't ever want to go through this.
Welcome back to the Tim Teaches podcast. I'm your host, Tim McCoy. Today I'm joined by Barry Adkins, and we're going to dive into his story and journey. It's a heartfelt story of loss, resilience, and purpose. But before we get started, if you're listening and you find value in this episode, please leave a comment, like, share this episode. And Barry, welcome to the Tim Teaches podcast, and thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me on, Tim. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Barry reached out to me actually just yesterday, and his story was, it had me in tears, 100%. And that doesn't happen too often for a guy like me. And so your story is personal to you, and I don't want to give away the details of that story, but how it has transpired and how you're helping folks. I don't know how you would like to start this podcast, but your story doesn't begin in 2005. Your story begins with your son and when he was born. And I'd kind of like to know a little bit about your son.
Yeah. So he was an awful student. Let's be clear about that. But he had a good heart. I remember going to a parent-teacher conferences where they would, obviously I knew what his grades were like, but he had a good heart. And he had a friend named David that he befriended in third grade. David was in a wheelchair. Nothing wrong with David except his legs didn't work. But Kevin he was that guy. He took care of him, made sure he got to class, to the bus. David's mom would drop him off over at our house. They would actually park the wheelchair at the front door. And David would kind of army crawl around as best he could, but Kevin wouldn't wait for him a lot of times and just grab him by the arms and drag him around. And they had a lot of fun together. As he got in high school, he got his driver's license and stuff. He would come home and tell me stories about stopping on the freeway and giving people rides and, help them change tires, whatever they needed. That's just how him and his friends rolled. They just all were that way. Let's stop and help him.
Yeah. It sounds like he had a adventurous soul, and
he did.
That could be a good thing, and that can be that could lead you into some other areas.
Yes.
This story, it's hard for me to really mention it because I'll just cut to the chase. You lost your son to alcohol, and it wasn't obviously it wasn't expected. It was a one-off incident that was a tragic incident, and I don't know how you normally begin this story or the message that you want to share, but I'm all ears.
Well, to give the brief story, if I told you this, if somebody made this a movie script, it would probably be thrown out because it's such a crazy thing to happen. He died of alcohol poisoning on the day he moved out. He had sat down a couple weeks before that in this brown chair and talked about how his life was finally beginning and he wanted to move out. He was out of high school. He's 18 years old, right? And honestly, I didn't want him to move out. He was the baby of the family. 2 weeks later, there's a cop standing in front of that brown chair telling me that your son is dead. And, you can't understand it when they tell you that. You really can't understand it. And, we said, well, who was it? Because we had a number of children, and they said it was Kevin, and they handed me his driver's license. And that's when the reality hit him, because until that moment in time, you're just thinking, they've got the wrong house, right? They need to be 3 streets over and next door. whatever. But when they hand you your child's driver's license, you know he's gone and he's never coming back.
Yeah. I mean, that's a knock you never want to have to make in being in law enforcement, being the guy to walk up to those doors and pass along those messages. It's horrible, man.
Probably didn't make it any better because honestly, it didn't even occur to me something bad had happened. You know, there was 2 cops and someone in plain clothes at the front door. And I actually joked with them as they came in. I thought maybe it had something to do with something in the neighborhood. Did I see a car? Was there a dog? You know, that kind of stuff. And that probably didn't make it any easier for them because I honestly had no earthly idea why they were there. As I tell everybody, I'm that guy. It's not something, losing your child is not something I ever thought about. You know, that happens to other people, but it never happens to me. Right.
Was his mother around?
So his biological mother and I were divorced. He was living with us. I wasn't involved in notifying her. We managed the divorce okay, but there really wasn't in any communication with her. And it turned out, I found out later that actually she was letting him and his friends go over to her house and party. So, you know, It's one of those things I don't blame anybody for anything. It is what it is.
Yeah. It's, you try to be the cool parent and have the kids over to party at your house. And I understand the rationale where it's like, well, I'd rather them do it here than somewhere else, but you're also kind of encouraging that behavior. And so, there's people a lot smarter than me who can make those judgment calls. But as a parent, you know, I don't want to be that guy, you know, leading the kid down that path. So can you kind of get into a little bit about what happened with him?
So, he moved out of the house that day. That night they decided to throw a housewarming party for him. Started doing shots. He did a bunch of shots, 6 or 7 shots. I've heard different stories, whether it was Jack Daniels or Jägermeister. I think they were double shots as well. And he left a voicemail for his sister that night, talking about how much fun he's having and how he loves his nephew Colin more than anything in the whole world. He passed out a short time after he left that voicemail. People at the party laid him in his bed on his side in case he vomited. They actually went in and shaved his head and his legs while he was passed out because he was just passed out, right? But his buddy Craig was worried about him and kept going back in to check on him. Around 4 a.m., calls started coming into 911. First calls were difficulty breathing. Next calls were not breathing. My son died alone in a hospital while I slept peacefully in my bed.
No words can. So, I mean, they transported him to the hospital. That's not so. Yeah, I've been on scenes where, you know, somebody's passed away or very, very critical and making that transport, and you just hope and pray from a law enforcement side of things that, you know, that person will be saved. And I'm not sure how. The only research I've done on alcohol is drinking margaritas myself, you know. That's my research, you know. And, you know, alcohol poisoning is a real thing, but it's not talked about. And there's not, you know, I'm sure you can find all kinds of information about it, but it's not an everyday conversation that people are having. And, you know, kids, you know, they're trying to have the best time ever. And if one is good, 2 is better. And, you know, they just drink and drink until they don't understand what they're doing to themselves. And I don't know what that threshold is from you're fine, just drunk, having a good time till you're dead. And,
yeah, there is no real specific threshold from what I have read. his blood alcohol content was 0.36, which is pretty drunk. The coroner had told me they had seen as low as 0.24% kills typically teenagers because they have no tolerance for it. And really, the key message there is that if somebody's passed out, don't mess around. Get them to the hospital. Think about Kevin's buddy, Craig. It's a night he'll never forget, I promise you.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I've had some of those nights myself where, just
we all have
drink and wake up and I'm like, whew, I'm kind of lucky to be alive this morning, even though you feel like shit, you just don't know. It's not something to mess around with, especially when you're young like that. So what was kind of the process? I know you've written a book and, I don't want to steal your thunder or talk about, what transpired after that and how did you move forward and start this process of healing and sharing this story?
So it's a life-changing event, right? And frankly, I was angry with God. How could he possibly have let this happen? Why didn't he take me, let my son live, right? I actually tried to tell him, look, you're God, back up time. Mm-hmm. Take me and let him live. And I don't think I'm unique in that. I think there's a lot of parents that say, yeah, take me, let him live. A couple of days later, I had another life-changing event that really has spawned all of this. I was laying in bed. It was about 4:00 in the morning. And all I can describe is I felt like somebody had walked in the room, but I hadn't seen him yet. There was a light that I have never seen before and haven't seen since. And there was a message. Kevin didn't suffer, and something very good come from this. Why I was chose for this message, I am not the right guy for this, right? I am living proof that God doesn't choose the qualified. He qualified the chosen. Why it's me? I'd be the last guy I would pick, right? But here I am, spreading that message. And that's really been the focus, is trying to make something very good come from such a senseless tragedy. That's what I've spent the last 19 years doing. And that's what I tell kids all the time.
I have a lot of spirituality and loss and have seen some things and experienced some things where you're experiencing the unexplainable in human terms, but in a spiritual realm, it makes perfect sense, some of the stuff that you experience. And oh man, the thing is, like, people been watching some videos and reading some things, and it's like, I kind of, there's a lot of different things going on with spirituality and what's actually going on in this life and this world. And some people say we're here for, it's like a spiritual school. We're here to learn things. And we come down we come down and we learn some things, and we go back and go, wow, okay, I learned from that. Next time, maybe it'll be a lot easier, or maybe I'm ready for a harder lesson. And we continue to learn and grow in a spiritual realm. And there's so much going on that we don't understand. And so why that happened, who knows? But that spirit, that light that showed up in your room, I believe that wasn't there by mistake. That was there to show you something that you needed to see to help you on this path and this journey. And speaking of journeys, you made one after this. You talk about your journey with your son.
Yeah. So I'll start with this. So we decided to have him cremated, and I went down to pick up his ashes, and I'll never forget walking into that funeral home, and they've got pictures on the wall, and they're playing music in the background, and they set me down in an office in a big comfortable chair. funeral director walks in and sets that urn down in front of me. An urn that holds all the remains of the kid that I burped, changed his diapers, coached baseball, basketball, soccer, football. I taught him to shoot a gun and swing a golf club, right? All the remains of him were sitting in an urn in front of me. And there's one thing I knew at that point, and that was I didn't want to be a victim. That the world doesn't need any more victims. We've got plenty already. The world needs people who take something bad and they make something very good come from it. And I thought about what I would hope somebody else would do if it happened to their kid. And for me, it was pretty easy. I'm just going to get out and tell the story. Whatever that looks like, I'm going to tell the story. So now we have to figure out what to do with his ashes. I actually grew up in Kalispell, Montana. It's up in the northwest corner by Glacier Park. Kevin had been there a number of times and always talked about wanting to move there someday and buy a ranch. So we decided to take his ashes to Montana. The normal thing to do is put them in your car and drive there. I decided to put them in my backpack and walk 1,400 miles from Gilbert, Arizona to Kalispell, Montana, and tell the story along the way, because I guarantee you don't ever want to go through this.
Absolutely. It's something that no parent should have to go through, and unfortunately, so many do. What was day one for you?
Well, I could probably talk for about another 3 hours about the walk. Day one was good, right? And think about physically preparing for this, right? You can go out, and I did on the weekends. I'd walk 15 or 20 miles a day and kind of get used to it. But there's nothing to prepare you for day after day after day. Right? Because I ended up averaging about 14 miles a day. And that's well and good for a few days. But then things like blisters start creeping in, and plantar fasciitis and sore knees and all of that kind of stuff. And I've often been asked, did I ever think about quitting? No, but I certainly started wondering what I got myself into, because physically it was tough. There was definitely, but you haven't been to Arizona, but between Arizona, Gilbert here is about 1,300 feet. Flagstaff that I walked through is at 7,400 feet.
Oof.
And there's a ton of hills between here and there. So getting to Flagstaff was actually the hardest part physically.
Yeah, I could imagine. Sometimes you're out in the middle of nowhere, I would imagine, on these journeys. What, are you staying in? Are you camping? Are you staying in hotels? How are you staying?
I'm staying at hotels every night. I was actually 48 when I did this, and I needed support. So my wife actually went with me. She met me every 3 or 4 miles all the way along, but we stayed in hotels every night. We would mark the very exact spot. I still have the book somewhere where she'd write down mile markers. Okay, we're going back to this mile marker, and then we're going to go from here. But logistically, there were a lot of challenges, right? Because this predates all the cool tools that you have today. I probably told a story 35 or 40 times. So we had to schedule, okay, I need to stop right here. I need to walk for a while, look at the clock. Okay, we're going to stop. Now we're going to go to this school and do this. And then I'm going to come back and start again, or it's the end of the day. There was logistics. I tell everybody I'm the guy that did the walking and talking, but there were several people behind the scenes that were managing everything else. Because, back then TV stations would actually come out and interview you. Newspapers would come out and interview you. People would stop and talk to me and ask me what I'm doing out there and ask me if I needed a ride. I met a lot of wonderful people along the way. The world's full of good people, really.
Yeah. So your wife was, she's the backbone. She's the one waiting for you to hurry up. It's time.
she would actually time me, because she'd go ahead 3 or 4 miles and then she'd wait. And we had some two-way radios, and somebody'd stop and talk to me. Well, that'd delay me by 20 minutes. And then she'd be calling me. Hurry up. Who are you? What is going on? Because she was afraid I'd get hurt, or I was walking along two-lane roads, right? I could have got hit by a car.
Oh, yeah.
Almost anything could have happened, but it didn't. I didn't have a single sick day or weather day.
What's your normal thought while you're out there walking around? I mean, are you just grinding and thinking like one more mile? Are you thinking about your son? Are you thinking about all of the above?
All of the above. Part of the process there, like I said, I never thought about quitting, but I started wondering what I'd gotten into, right? And I wasn't even to Flagstaff yet. And I'm like, man, I got 1,200 miles to go here. But I realized that I was thinking about it wrong. I was thinking about 1,200 miles. It changed my mindset to, I'm going to walk 3 more miles, take a break, see where we go from there. And it's not a bad metaphor for life, right? Because you don't think you can get all the way to that point. But if you start taking those steps, eventually the next thing you know, you're in Utah.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, you're in Idaho. Oh, wow. There's a sign for Kalispell. I might actually make it. But I stopped thinking about those distances because it gets, you can imagine, it gets inside your head.
I would imagine that's a long ways to walk. And you start ticking off 1 mile at a time, boy, that's going to seem like an eternity. How long did it take you?
It took about 4 months. I had, like I said, about 14 miles a day. Ran into a fair amount of snow, not a lot of snow. We actually left in February, and I've been asked, why did you leave in February rather than in, May? But I wanted to hit schools along the way, right? Mm-hmm. And so I had to leave in February in order to make it to all of the schools I wanted to hit before school got out. So that was all part of it. There was actually an organization called notmykid.org. They helped set up all of that stuff. Not sure if you follow baseball very much, but there was a Diamondbacks pitcher, Todd Stottlemyre. Mel Stottlemyre was his dad for the Yankees. He ended up putting up a lot of the money that we needed to make this happen because I wasn't independently wealthy, right? Like we were talking about, I have a day job.
Yeah.
Right. So there was a lot of people that stepped up and helped this thing happen.
How'd the kids receive you at the schools?
It's interesting. These kids, I've had numerous principals say, I have never seen them that quiet. I think it's a God thing. 'Cause I'll walk in and start talking and, there's 1,000 kids in the room, but you can hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
Right. And I've always said it's not me, it's him. Right. Because it still happens today. I just had a teacher tell me that it was about 75 kids in a wrestling room, right? And talked to them. And the teacher said afterwards, I cannot believe how quiet they were. And they do listen. One of the high schools wrote me some thank you notes, which they asked them to do that. Let's be clear. But I figured it's like, hey, thanks for coming out. Have a nice day. But the stuff they wrote shocked me because they understood, because I talk about adversity and forgiveness and decision making, and they actually understood that. They wrote about, now I know I'm going to face hard times. I know I need to, fight through it.
Yeah. There's kids, man, when they're 15, 16, 17, all the way, well, probably to
25
now. Yeah, 25, 30 nowadays. I mean, you think you know it all and you think you're invincible and nobody can tell you anything. And it just takes one bad decision, and it can change yours and everybody else's life around you. And so, yeah, if you're a young man or woman and you're watching this and somebody tells you, hey, maybe this isn't the best idea because I've experienced this. We're sharing our experiences because we're trying to help people and because we want them to learn from our mistakes so you don't wind up making your own tragic mistake.
Yes.
And man, I do like appreciate you sharing this story, but it's a rough one, especially, coming kind of from my background, because my parents have also, lost their firstborn son, and it was due to alcohol. He was riding in a vehicle with three other or two other boys. It was actually my brother's vehicle. He had a drinking problem, and he had gotten a DUI, and he was a professional drunk driver and actually pretty good at it. But because he got a DUI, months, like maybe a year later, instead of him being the idiot behind the wheel, he let his friend do it so that he didn't get in trouble. And his friend drove the three of them into a tree and killed them all. And that was just a party they were at, and one of those boys was 17, one of them was 19, and my brother was 30, and he was hanging out with younger kids and, just being irresponsible back then, and it cost all three of them their life. And watch what you drink, watch how much you drink, and don't freaking ride in vehicles with people that have been drinking, that's the message I want to share.
Yeah, it alters lives in ways you just can't imagine. It can destroy parents.
Yeah.
It can, lead them to drinking. It can lead them to drugs. It can lead to divorce, all of those things. But one of the things that we really focused on was there's nothing I can do about the past.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit and play the blame game. Should I have done more? I'm certain of it. Right. But if you play that blame game, it'll destroy you. It really will. And the way I like to describe it is, when that loved one dies, the old you died with that loved one.
Yeah.
There's a new you there. How that new you turns out is up to you.
Yeah.
It really is. In my case, I had a lot of help. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
But the old you is gone, and you want to go back and feel the way you did the day before they passed away. I did for years. I'm like, why can't I feel that way again? And you can't, because they're gone.
It's different. They've changed. You've changed, and the world has changed, and yeah, with my parents, it was night and day. I mean, the relationship, our family dynamic, and the gatherings, everything different, never the same. We had fun, but there's always that in the back of your mind, we're missing a piece of this family.
There's an empty chair.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate. It's horrible, but that's just something that happened, and that's part of life, and good things happen and bad things happen, and we don't understand all the reasons behind them. But, I've kind of learned that, all these tragedies, they're things that happened in my life, but they don't have to define who I am for the rest of my life. I can grow. I can become a better person. I can help others, and that's what I'm trying to do through this podcast, is to share these stories, because there's so much tragedy in the world, and sadness and despair. And, I believe in a higher power, and I understand, I don't know how I talk about psychedelics all the time on my podcast. And the reason is because I dealt with a lot of trauma and PTSD and depression and anxiety, and I tried all the pharmaceutical drugs and the counseling and everything, and nothing worked for me, and my last resort, which I was never inclined to do and had never done, turned into ayahuasca, which is a hallucinogen, and it's a very powerful one. And they're using these different psychedelics nowadays to help veterans. And there's MDMA and psilocybin and ayahuasca, all kinds of different stuff. And, I just happened to be pulled down the path of ayahuasca. And it's not a recreational drug. It's something that is extremely powerful and will change you. But it changed me for the better, and
Good.
all of those things that I had experienced, I'm like, it showed me, yeah, those are things that happen to you, but that's not who you have to be. You don't have, that doesn't define you. You can still live a joyous life, and remember those loved ones and forget those tragedies. They happen, but it's not, it's not, it doesn't have to be forever. You can share your experiences to help other people.
Yeah. As parents, the other thing that we made a decision about was it's okay to talk about him, right? I've talked to people who have lost children, and they said that, that person never comes up in conversation anymore.
Yep.
And I think you should talk about him. He was there. He was part of your family. And to not talk about him, I think just makes the problem worse.
Yeah.
Right. It's okay to talk about all the silly stuff he did, right? How he did this and that. And, those kinds of things that they still come up from time to time. And I think they were part of your life. So I think it's healthy to talk about.
Yeah. You're doing them a disservice by not remembering them and
Yeah.
and remembering the good times. And there was so much joy throughout your little son's life and your life and my brother's life. And it's like, we owe it to them to remember those stories and to discuss them, especially amongst the people that knew that person, knew your son. Yeah. And, it's a wild life.
It is. I still talk to his friends. That's another fairly common question I get asked. Craig was one of the slower to kind of grow up and get married and all that. So he went to a baby shower for him last summer, and he's got a wife and a baby now. The others really said that it changed their lives for the better because they grew up on that day. They realized that the stuff they were doing was not safe. And they still come over to the house, or, I meet them for dinner or whatever they want to do. I still see them, but it's been 20 years.
Good for you. Because there's a lot of other people out there who a tragedy like that happens, they just blame, and it's easy to blame the people that were there, but that wasn't their intent. They were just trying to have a good time and be boys and celebrate your son's coming to
coming of age, shall we say?
Coming of age, yeah. And so for you to be able to still talk to those guys and spend time with them and let them know, like, hey, accidents happen and it's sad and tragic, but you're helping heal them as well as heal yourself.
Yeah.
Man, Barry, this is an intense conversation. I appreciate you reaching out to me and sharing this experience. And, I'm truly sorry for the loss of your son. I couldn't, I have a 5-year-old son, and, that's rough, and I do think about what if something happened, because I have kind of lived a little bit of that in my life. And so, I'm probably going to be hovering dad who tries to protect him, but you can only do so much, and can't be there every moment, and so, but if people wanted to get a hold of you, have you come share your story and your journey, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
The website is kevinslastwalk.com. But primarily I post everything, including this podcast, on Facebook. It's Kevin's Last Walk, all one word. That's really the best way to do that. And if I have to travel outside of the state, the only thing I charge is travel costs. Done that several times, and it ain't about the money for me.
Yeah.
It's about telling the story. So, really, it's just travel costs, and I'm happy to do it.
Well, it's a powerful story. So I appreciate you joining me, taking the
Yeah.
time on a weekend to speak
Yeah.
with me, and I'll get it put out there for the masses, and we'll share Kevin's story, and he'll continue to help change lives and help people. So thank you very much.
You bet. Thanks for having me on, Tim.